Welcome into the EMAW Online Podcast. Mason Voth, Alec Bussey here with you as we get this Monday underway. The final 2 weeks of the regular season in the Big 12 are here. A couple of games tonight in the league, including KU at TCU. TCU actually a 1.5-point favorite in that game, which just blows my mind. I get it, whatever algorithm or system you have to pick favorites in Vegas, throw it out the window when Kansas is involved. You're an idiot. Whoever set that line, you're an idiot. That's all I have to say. The Jayhawks, they're not going to lose to TCU again. They are not going to be embarrassed by them like they were the first time in Allen Fieldhouse. And I think KU probably goes and wins by like 10 tonight or something. But K-State, they've got a big one on Tuesday. They will take on Baylor. The Bears are licking their wounds coming off of a surprising collapse against KU. Most teams, you collapse in Allen Fieldhouse, it's expected, but the Bears were up by 17 at one point in the first half, and ultimately that lead was gone before the second media timeout in the second half, and then KU cruised and was able to coast to an easy victory. So I don't know what to expect from Baylor coming in. There's a couple ways it can play out. They're either so down and surprised by what happened that they'll come to Manhattan on Tuesday and still be feeling the effects of that, or they're going to be really frustrated and highly motivated, and you might get a version of Baylor that you don't really want to see if you're K-State. But either way, K-State has momentum of their own to play off of. They got the win against Iowa State. It was much needed. They were down 8 at halftime. It was a brutal half of basketball. 31-23 was the score, and things looked a little bit bleak for the Wildcats. But then before the under-16 timeout came, they'd already taken the lead. They just kind of came out and blitzed Iowa State. A lot of things went their way. Marquise Noel was much better in the second half, and that was really the story in the second half was Noel and then defense for K-State.
Yeah, I thought K-State played a lot better in the second half against Iowa State on Saturday, and I think a lot of it comes with Marquise Noel, who scored 18 points in the second half. And I thought Kansas State did a really good job of getting him in actions to get open, get some good looks from three. He goes 4 of 7 from beyond the perimeter in the second half. That's all 4 shots he made in the second half, in addition to 6 free throws. So he did a good job of getting to the line as well. And then I thought he did a better job, I think you could say, of limiting his turnovers against a pretty solid Big 12 defense, one of the top 2-3 in the league. Turns it over 4 times. It's, again, still too many turnovers. You'd like that to be closer to 2 or 3.
One of those turnovers that he got, I would put it more on David Gasson than Noel. I thought Noel put it in a good spot for Gasson. He just dropped it in the lane. And I can live with Marquise Noel turning the ball over 4 times if he's going to play 37 minutes and touch the ball more than anybody else. For most guys, you'd look at it and say 4 is getting a little high. I can live with 4 turnovers from Noel. And they weren't bad ones by any means on Saturday.
I guess. I don't know. I would like my point guard to be at 2 or 3 at most. So to see 4 is an improvement, I guess you could say. I know it was lower against Oklahoma, but that's not a team that turns you over a ton. But yeah, overall, I thought K-State played a lot better in the second half. I think their interior play the last 2 games has continued to struggle, though. You look at what David Gasson gives you, comes off the bench and is actually their 7th man or 8th man, because Desi Sills gets inserted into the starting lineup and Baby Iziola gets minutes before David Gasson, which I actually think is pretty warranted, because Gasson plays 12 minutes, only has 2 points, 1 or 2 from the field, and only has 1 rebound. He did have 2 blocks, though, so he's better on the defensive end. But Baby Iziola gives you basically nothing other than 2 rebounds in 11 minutes. And then Naquan Tomlin, I think, regressed a little bit to the mean in his 23 minutes. Struggled with foul trouble a little bit. Ends the game with 4, goes 2 of 3 from the field for 5 points, but does give you 6 rebounds. So that supporting cast on the inside, I think, could be a little bit better. But Ish Massoud gives you some pretty good minutes, 9 points, gets you 3 rebounds. Could have been a little bit more efficient from the field. 4 of his points come from the free throw line. So 1 of 5 from beyond the arc, 2 of 6 from the field. You like Ish to be a little bit better there, but I think we started to see his continued regression to the mean, where he was shooting around 50% from beyond the arc in Big 12 play a while ago. Now it's starting to sink back more towards a number that you would more traditionally expect from a 3-point shooter.
Well, Ish didn't shoot the ball well on Saturday, but I thought that he played well in a lot of other areas that could keep him on the floor, and you'll live with it. I mean, he hit 1 big 3 as the shot clock was winding down for K-State. That was much needed, and I just think we've seen better defense out of him. We've seen a lot of hustle. He's on the floor a lot now, going for loose balls, just a more aggressive player. And I think that he had that step in the right direction where he got a lot of the love after the Kansas game when he ended up, essentially winning the game for K-State by getting on the floor and forcing the ball in the air. And then I think since then he's continued to grow in that category. So I thought Ish Massoud was good on Saturday. It's tough because the way that Massoud had been valued in the past was he was going to have to come in and knock down 2 or 3 critical shots in a game, maybe more. He struggled shooting the basketball on Saturday, but I thought he did a lot of other things really well. Found himself in the right spot, and he contributed to K-State playing really good defense over the weekend. So the scoring wasn't there, but I think that he's continued to find ways to be active and keep himself on the floor. So we'll see if it continues. And the benefit would be that at some point he's going to be able to start making shots again. Like he's not going to be a 50% shooter. Nobody actually is a 50% shooter, but he can shoot it from 3, and he's still at 42%, close to 43 this year. So I think you expect a game where he's going to come out and he's going to be able to put that all together, and he can be a real help to you. When it comes to the bigs for K-State, I mean, Gasson, it's a weird week for him. I don't know what's going on there. If he was still feeling whatever effects there was from the illness that Jerome Tang said that he had on Tuesday. I know that John Rothstein tweeted before the game that he was a game time decision. But he hasn't given K-State much recently. And I like the decision to start Desi over him. I think the next move is trying to figure out a way to get, but I don't know. I don't know the best way to phrase it. I don't know if it's spacing isn't necessarily the thing, because K-State does space out pretty well right now, but they just don't have the guys that can actually be effective when you space out. Like starting Desi Sills and Cam Carter together, you can space the floor, as in you're going to be, physically you will be spaced out. But from a standpoint of how you're scoring, you're probably not going to be able to, because Carter and Sills are shooting a combined 29% from 3 this year. And I think that number went down after Saturday. I think that the next step for K-State might be trying a lineup, and it's going to take the right team to do it against. But I think the next step is probably starting something like Noel, Sills, Massoud, Tomlin, and Johnson on the floor at the same time. And maybe that gives you a better offensive punch early in the game. And also, if those guys can prove themselves as defenders, because Marquise Noel, I thought, was really good defensively on Saturday. He forced the 2 key turnovers down the stretch to steal the game. And if Massoud's going to step it up, then that's a big thing. So I think that's probably the next thing that I want to see from K-State in terms of switching up the lineup, because there's been a lot that's, left to be desired with Cam Carter in the starting lineup recently.
Yeah, and to go back to the David Gasson point and the struggles that he had last week, over the last 3 games, so dating back to the loss at Texas Tech, Gasson's only averaging 0.7 points a game and 1.7 rebounds. And I know he only played 5 minutes or whatever it was, 2 minutes against Oklahoma. So that definitely factors into it. But to play 12 minutes on Saturday against Iowa State certainly isn't super inspiring, I guess you could say. I don't know. He hasn't been giving them as much as I feel like people maybe wanted as he came back from his ankle injury. And then you talked about Cam Carter a little bit there at the end. Carter's obviously, I think, struggled a little bit of late. I think he got back on a positive track a little bit on Saturday against Iowa State. Scored 6 points, makes 2 threes. One of them's in the first half, and it looked like he was trying to draw contact in the corner and was kind of like swinging his legs out. I honestly think it was a pretty lucky shot to make, if you ask me. But Carter's certainly someone who has not been great for K-State over the last recent stretch of games. He did have 7 points in the win over TCU, but then he had the 2 scoreless outings, the losses at Texas Tech and Oklahoma. And it's not like he's giving them a ton on the glass either. He only had 3 total rebounds in those 2 games. But against Iowa State, he was a lot better. Scored 6 points, like I said, had 3 rebounds, which is a lot better. But he did turn it over a couple times. So the Cam Carter experience is what it is at this point. I don't think you're counting on him to give you double figures. There's obviously been games this season where he's gone off for impressive scoring nights, like the 15 he scored at Iowa State, but I think like 9 of those happened in the first half, or 12 of those happened in the first half. And then he also was pretty impactful in the win at Texas, where he gave him 17 points. And I think back to that win at Texas and That was their second or third Big 12 game. And I think you're probably hoping like, hey, maybe this gets him jump started, maybe start seeing some shots fall. But, it really just hasn't been there for Cam Carter, especially on the offensive end. And I think a lot of that has to come from just the fact that, he's not a great shooter from 2-point range, 37.5% this year. You'd like that to be over 45%, especially for a guard. But then to kind of just like further evaluate that, when he drives to the rim, he just loses control of his body. He doesn't seem to go up strong. He looks to try and avoid contact or act like a foul is coming when maybe it's not coming. They need to get him to just play stronger, play tougher when attacking the rim. And I think that percentage will go up because he isn't a poor athlete by any means. I don't know if he's an elite athlete. Like, he's certainly not someone who's going to, elevate and throw down thunderous jams and, electrify crowds with his ability to do crazy dunks or swat a ball 10 rows deep on a block or whatever. But he's not a below average athlete. So if you can get him to kind of attack the rim with more ferocity, I think that would help him. But again, at this point, there's 2 weeks left in the regular season. I don't know how much more you can really ask from Cam Carter from a developmental standpoint.
Yeah, not what K-State has right now is what they're going to be. And essentially what it is Noel and Johnson have a lot on their plates, and sometimes they can still go out there and carry the load like they did on Saturday. They were the only two guys in double figures. They put together better performances than what we had seen recently. Johnson didn't get into foul trouble, surprisingly. You looked up, and K-State had a bunch of guys in the game with 3 fouls, except for Keontae Johnson. The turnovers were better. He was more efficient scoring, and better than that, he was finishing at the rim when K-State needed to. That was one of the issues that he had in the game in Lubbock. He had a couple of shots that were point-blank range, and even though there are guys there, you expect Keontae Johnson to finish, and he just didn't. So he was better and looking more in his form on Saturday. And then the rest of the guys that are out there, they're just kind of wild cards. And K-State's issue is going to be if Noel and Johnson are locked down totally, they don't have much of a chance to win. But then if those guys are on, what they're going to need is either a great defensive performance like they had against Iowa State. It helps that Iowa State was without one of their top guns in Caleb Grill, who can really help you out offensively. And then, the rest of the roster, there are some guys that you can count on every once in a while, but you just don't know when that's going to be. So Naquan Tomlin, Ish Massoud, Desi Sills, Cam Carter, guys like that can have games where they're going to elevate themselves and help you, but you don't know when that game's going to come. And there's a chance that you're going to have some games where none of them show up and you don't get help from any of them. And that's just kind of how K-State's going to have to deal right now. They've gone a lot further than a team with this roster probably should. There was a lot of talk about, Jerome Tang and what this team has done and where they were expected to be, and then how they started to play. So then that changes expectations, which it should. Like, if you're sitting at 6-1 in the Big 12, at that point, you should start thinking about playing for a conference championship because that's the group of teams that you're mixed in with. So it's unfortunate when you drop from that. But like, if you zoom out and look at it as a whole, this roster, I mean, and I think this is a credit to the coaching staff that at times has gotten criticized over the last couple of weeks for what they've done. The fact that they have this roster at 20-7, where there's only one 3-point shooter when it comes to in terms of volume that you can rely on, Marquise Noel, but he's gone through a really cold stretch. Keontae Johnson was fine, early on and really good, but it hasn't been there lately. And then you're just kind of banking on some other guys. There's inconsistencies on this team, and they've been able to power through it. So that's just how they're going to have to continue to play. And that's why I think you have to hope that this team continues to defend well, because that's probably their avenue to being able to win more important games down the stretch. Like them scoring 116 at Texas, we're not going to see that again this season. That game in itself was a totally different ball game, and it's also just kind of changed in general with how they're playing. But they're going to have to be able to use their energy, defend well, and then hopefully you get a couple of other guys to step up. And I think we saw the starts of that on Saturday against Iowa State. So, I think that this team is in a decent spot right now. We know that they're a 3 seed according to the selection committee. You play against Baylor. We'll see how that game ends up going. That'll probably be pretty telling to us on what the last couple of games will be like in the regular season, because the game at Oklahoma State's going to be a tough one. Oklahoma's probably your easiest game left on the schedule. It's the last home game of the year, and they're not a great team, although you just lost to them. So we'll see how that kind of affects the psyche K-State, and then the road trip to Morgantown. So there's a lot to look at for K-State moving forward, but I mostly take away positives from their game against Iowa State, because you don't score it all in the first half. You're down 8, but you're able to turn it on in the second half, and hopefully they leave it turned on.
Yeah, and I think Saturday's game or Tuesday's game against Baylor is a really good opportunity to kind of see where K-State's at. Iowa State, I don't think played particularly well on Saturday. So, give credit to yourself and be happy that you got a win, but also maybe recognize that Iowa State ended the game 1 of 7 from the field. And that obviously contributes to you being able to open up a 6-point lead. They shoot the ball.
Yeah, but I think that was K-State's defense. Like I think they made Iowa State play poorly on Saturday. I get Iowa State didn't play great.
Shot 31%. Like, you can play good defense, but you still shot 31%.
Yeah, I agree with
defense
that.
Only goes so far. Like, at the end of the day, a team shot 31%. Like, I'm giving credit to K-State, but also, like, you're college players and you should shoot better than 31% from the field and 19% from the 3-point line, and you should probably be a little bit better in terms of layups, where they were 8 of 26. So at the end of the day, Iowa State should have been better, and they missed 5 free throws. Like, if you go 8 of 26 from layups, like, you probably really don't deserve to win. So give credit to K-State for playing good defense, and they certainly have length on the inside that makes making layups and dunks a little bit more difficult. That they didn't attempt to dunk, but shots around the rim, like, K-State has the personnel to make that a little bit difficult for their opponents. But Iowa State still didn't play particularly well. They had long stretches where they didn't score, particularly in the second half, and they also didn't shoot it well from the perimeter at all. I mean, when you look at what Gabe Kalsher goes from 3 of 12, that's tough. Like, they're not going to win when he's that inefficient from beyond the 3-point line. And again, like, give K-State credit for making some of those looks tough, and give K-State credit for defending around the rim well. But Iowa State also, and they're an offensive challenge team. Like, we know that, but they still shot 30% from the field. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And Iowa State did not play good on Saturday, but neither did K-State. Like, you scored 23 points in the first half. You played like crap. I don't care who you're playing against. You're down 8. The way that thing went, it was not great for K-State, but they were able to turn it on. I think that they deserve, I don't know. I think you're giving them credit, but I think that you should give them more, because, and the way it sounded to me was more so like you were putting this more on Iowa State playing bad than K-State playing better than them and doing enough to make them play bad. I think K-State,
second half, yeah.
I think K-State had a pretty heavy hand in Iowa State playing bad. And if you look at Kalsher, like, compare him to teams that we think play good defense in the Big 12. So he goes 4 of 14 against K-State. A week ago, he was 2 of 12 against Oklahoma State. And then you go back further than that, he was he's had some bad shooting nights. West Virginia, he was 17% from the field. He missed 11 shots against Texas Tech at the end of January. So good defensive teams have made Kalsher not really, put together a great performance. I think what he did against K-State back in Ames, like that, he hit some just unreal shots, and that was a night that he was on. Against K-State, the second time around, they defended him better. They forced him to take some really bad ones. I mean, most of the shots he jacked up were threes. He was 3 of 12 from deep. So I think that they just defended better as a whole against Iowa State. And again, the one crack that I will give to Iowa State is that K-State had to do this without Caleb Grill on the floor. And he certainly helps Iowa State in a lot of different ways, because he's going to shoot close to 40% from 3 and can help out there. But I think K-State deserves a lot of credit for bouncing back. 2 losses, you can't lose that game, and you played great defense down the stretch to finish it off. And the offense started to look a little bit more similar to what we saw the first half of the year, because Noel and Johnson got going.
Yeah, and honestly, I kind of think like Saturday's game was I kind of think it was a reverse script of the Texas game in Manhattan, where K-State played really well in the first half against Texas, and they looked like crap in the second half and lost. Where Saturday's game against Iowa State, they looked like crap in the first half and they turned it on in the second half and they won. Like I think it was really kind of a flip. Like it was really a tale of two halves, not to use a cliche, but that's really kind of what it felt like.
Yeah, no,
Because even in the first half, like Iowa State shot it a lot better in the first half. They were 40% from the field in the first half.
yeah, no. I mean, Iowa State, they looked like that they were in control of it, and I think at halftime, that's where you just kind of sit there and go, well, this is either totally unraveled for K State, or they're going to have a good push to get it going, and they had that good push, and it sounds like they had a good little moment at halftime with the team where apparently Marquise Noel kind of challenged the bigs, and that seemed to work out in their favor. I think the best time that you get like to kind of rally and get everybody moving in the right direction, you need unless you're just this dominant team that's cruising past everybody and everything's fine throughout the season. I think you have to have that moment where somebody steps up in the locker room and says, hey, like this crap has to end right now. Like it can come from a coach after games and after losses, but I don't think it has the same meaning as like if you just attack what your fate might be head on in the middle of it, and you can still have a chance to right the ship in that specific game, then I think that's the most important thing you have. Like what Jerome Tang did after the Oklahoma game, it has some merit and it makes sense. But at the end of the day, like those guys do already feel like crap about what happened against Oklahoma, and they can't go back and change the outcome of the Oklahoma game now. Whereas Marquise Noel, if he steps up at halftime and he says something to the guys, then maybe that's better. Like I think back to, go back 4 years ago, K-State when they were in the midst of trying to win the Big 12. This was before they even actually got things rolling in the right direction. They had a game at home against West Virginia where they had started 0-2 in Big 12 play, and they were down 15 points at halftime to West Virginia. And the story out of that is that they go into the locker room and Barry Brown said to the team, like, if you don't believe that we can come back and win this thing, then you better just stay in the locker room. And K-State goes off in the second half. They outscore West Virginia by 17, and they win the game by 2. Barry Brown had 29 points, and that spurred K-State to go on a 9-game win streak where they beat every single team in the Big 12 over those 9 games. And ultimately, after starting 0-2, they win the league at 14-4. And I think that's one of those deals where if you have a guy that can step up in that moment in the middle of things collapsing and say, hey, we can still, prevent this thing from falling down, I think that's the best outcome. So I think what took place on Saturday is hopefully a good mark moving forward for K-State, because now these guys have some momentum again, and they're aware they can come back from, certain inefficiencies, and we'll see how it looks against Baylor. I mean, Baylor is a great test for them to see if you're back to the level of team that you thought you were 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's a good opportunity, I think, for K-State's offense to continue to kind of have some success, because Baylor's defense obviously is not very good. I believe it's still in the 70s in terms of efficiency rankings. Actually, it's even worse. It's 85th, and I'm sure that fell a lot after Saturday, considering the fact that they got 30 pieced by KU in the second half at Allen Fieldhouse. And gave up 86 points, I think it was. So certainly Baylor's defense is a weak point, but their guard play is incredible. What Adam Flagler has done for them this season has been insane. Gabe and I had him on our first team All Big 12 selection last week when we went through and did that. Keontae George is probably the freshman of the year in the league right now, along with Grady Dick. And I have so much respect for what LJ Cryer does for that Baylor team. And, even coming off the bench, like Langston Love would start on a lot of teams around the country, and getting Jonathan Chamachachua back is huge for them on the inside. And if you haven't watched Baylor since his return, he's a good connector, helps them on the defensive end. I know I said their defensive efficiency has fallen, but a lot of that probably has to do with the way they played against KU on Saturday. And Everyday John will step out and he'll shoot it from the perimeter. And I don't know what his percentage is, but I've seen him hit a couple in one game. And to be able to get him back is huge for Baylor. And Baylor's a team that I had a lot of stock in before the season. I never sold it, and I think I look pretty smart for not selling it despite their 0-3 start in league play. They're only a game back in the Big 12 standings right now, behind Texas and KU, who are at the top of the league. So Baylor's a really good team. They were able to fight through some early adversity, able to fight through not being fully healthy until a couple weeks ago. And Baylor, for my money, is one of the three best programs in the entire country over the last 5 years. And Scott Drew has a lot to do with that. And he's an incredible coach. And now he's trying to figure out some things on the defensive end in terms of reverting back to an old zone that he used to play. A 1-1-3, I think is what it is. So he's trying to do a lot of things on the defensive end, but this team doesn't guard as well as Baylor teams have in the past. So we'll see if the defensive struggles kind of hold Baylor back on Tuesday night at Bramlage, or if their guards kind of step up and carry them to another win like they have for much of the season. And again, like they're 9-5 in league play, but two of their losses at the beginning of the season came with their opponent making a couple lucky shots. So they're a couple losses, a couple made shots away from being in first place in the league by a couple games.
Yeah, well, and like that is the truth, but also at the end of the day, you can look around and say that about a lot of the teams in the Big 12 that are in the mix for it. Like if things go your way, that's just kind of how this league ends up playing out. K-State should be kicking themselves right now. You lost two winnable games against the two bottom teams in the league, and if you win those games, you're supposed to win. You're tied for first place with Texas and KU. So. It's just I think that's the part that's going to sting a little bit about what's taking place. But when you look at Baylor, I mean, you talked about their guards, and everybody knows about Flagler and George. Like they weren't a huge part of the problem on Saturday in Lawrence. They both go for 20 points. George turned it over a lot, but he was still pretty good for him and did a lot early on. But KU just kind of locked down in the second half and found a way to get the job done. KU, they came back and they end up, beating Baylor by 29 points in the second half to win 87-71. And KU was only 29% from three in the game. So Baylor's a really good team, but they've had a weakness defensively this year like they haven't had in past years. And that's one of the things I think could maybe help K-State match up a little bit better with Baylor. The problem is going to be because Baylor shoots it well, and you talked about, it's not just the guards now. It's the fact that you can't really trust leaving anybody open on the floor because Jonathan Tchamwa is going to step out there occasionally, and he's not going to jack up, 10 threes in the game. But in his 5 games since he's returned to the floor, he's 44% from three and has certainly added that to his game where he can do it if you leave him. So K-State's going to have to be on top of their game defensively against Baylor. And I think as long as they defend well, K-State's going to be able to score enough against Baylor, I would assume, based off of the way that the Baylor defense has been this season. And I anticipate a pretty good game on Saturday or on Tuesday. I just don't know if K-State's going to have enough guys be able to step up and help Noel and Johnson to get over the hump and beat Baylor a second time, because that's what helped them the first time. Mitch Massoud hit a big three in each period of that game. He had a big one in the first, a big one in the second, and a big one in overtime to help K-State get over the hump.
Yeah, and it's a game that I would expect to be pretty high scoring because Baylor puts a lot of points on everyone. So if it's a game played in the upper 70s, if it's a game played in the 80s, that's what I would expect. Like I would expect it to be pretty high scoring. And at that point, I think it probably favors Baylor a little bit. But again, like Baylor's offense is so good. It's so efficient because they take a ton of threes. They're a very good 3-point shooting team. Like that, they shoot 36.5% from three. It's top 60 in the country. They don't take a ton of tough twos. I will say, like, they take a lot of jump shots. So if there's a concern to be had about having Baylor stock, it's that they take a ton of jumpers. So if they run into an opponent that they just can't make shots against, kind of like Iowa last night against Northwestern, it's going to be tough for them to win. But that's every team in the country. If you're not making shots, it's tough to win.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of see how K-State's defense looks against Baylor. It wasn't very good against Baylor earlier in the season. Obviously, they gave up 95 points in overtime. They had an offensive rating that was really high in that game. To put up that many points is obviously something that's going to kind of contribute to you having some success. Yeah, an offensive efficiency rating of 121. That's third or fourth highest in Big 12 play that they've had in an individual game. They had one of 140 against Oklahoma, which is just nuts. And they also had they had a lot of success against Texas Tech and then
If
Oklahoma again, and they just put a number on West Virginia as well.
you
So
talk about like making shots and how that goes down. I mean, the thing that held Baylor back the first time they played, the teams were pretty darn even in every category. Both turned it over 12 times. Um, K-State ends up shooting 53% from the field. They go 34 of 64, and Baylor's 29 of 65. But Baylor got to the free throw line 7 more times than K-State, or excuse me, 17 more times than K-State, and they made 11 more free throws. The difference came down to K-State was 11 of 25 from three. Baylor was 8 of 25, to where 32% isn't like some crazy bad number, in a game, but it's not good. It's a little below average what you would expect. K-State was 44% from three, and that's really the difference. Baylor didn't hit enough shots in that game. K-State was able to make them. Both teams kind of feel like they're in different spots now, where Baylor's been getting those shots a little bit easier lately. K-State has been not making those shots as much, and it's been tougher for their main guys to get those shots, like Noel and Johnson, who combined for 56 in that game, and were both efficient in doing so. So, I'm fascinated to see how it goes on Tuesday, but there's new life into it. You feel like now that K-State has that first win again, that they can build off of that, and there were some things to take away that you can see a better path to them winning the game on Tuesday. Whereas going into the weekend, I thought K-State was going to lose to Iowa State and Baylor. I just didn't see how it was going to work out. But they showed me enough in that second half to where if they can come out and continue to improve just a little bit from where they were on Saturday, they're going to have a chance against Baylor. And it certainly helps when you see a team blow as big of a lead as Baylor did on Saturday, even if it's in Allen Fieldhouse. But Baylor should not do that with the players they have and the size of the lead that they had. To get whomped that badly in the second half by KU is a pretty tough pill to swallow, especially when, like I said, KU was only 29% from three on Saturday. So it's not like the Jayhawks were just lighting it up, similar to what they did to pull away from K-State.
Yeah, but they got a diverse scoring attack.
Well, yeah, no, that's true. But,
And when Kansas gets a diverse scoring attack, in my opinion, they're the best team in the country. Go look at what their starters have done in the last 4 games and how many points each of their starters have scored. And that's why I'm now in on Kansas potentially being a national title contender. Like, I wasn't there earlier, but now I'm getting there.
Well, it's just, it all comes down to, like, if DeJuan Harris is aggressive and taking and making shots, then they are really
Harris.
good.
It's not. I mean, it is Harris. Like, Harris is the one who leads that, but it's not just Harris. Like, McCullough has scored a ton in the last few games for them. Dick has been their leading scorer. He has like over 80 points in the last 4 or 5 games. Like, Jalen Wilson is like their third leading scorer over the last 3 games, which is nuts. Like, KJ Adams has had over 53, 54 points or something in the last 4 or 5 games for KU. Like, their scoring production from their starters over the last few games has been ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, the stretch going back to the game against Texas was really good. And that helped them, no doubt, with how it's gone down. So, I mean, they're figuring it out, but we'll see. I mean, they've got an interesting stretch coming up here. They'll be on the road twice in the final 4 games, at TCU today and then at Texas to end the season, with West Virginia and Texas Tech in between. So really these 2 games that bookend the season, the stretch here for KU, are going to be the important ones. But I mean, still, Baylor should have been able to do what they did. And I think the concerning thing should be, we talked about earlier in the year, matchup wise, like who matches up well with K-State. The fact that Baylor let KJ Adams be so good on Saturday, like KJ Adams has that in him, but KJ Adams isn't to the level to where he should be scoring 17 points on you like he did. And I think that leaves an area where K-State should probably look to see, how was KU able to utilize KJ Adams on Saturday, and can we find a weakness in there as well? And so I don't know. I mean, nobody's really built like KJ Adams for K-State or plays the way that he does, but I'd be interested to see how like a guy like Naquan Tomlin fares, and if they try to get it in his hands a little bit more often to take it down there and see if there are any holes that he can kind of exploit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm high on KJ Adams. I really like KJ Adams' game. I like his ability to kind of space the floor because he's pretty skilled. I know he's undersized as a 5, standing just like 6'7", 6'8", or whatever he's at. And he obviously doesn't weigh a ton either. But I've always liked KJ Adams' game, especially dating back to last year. I know he played a ton of minutes last season for them, but he started to play pretty well for KU over the last few games. I mean, 17 points against Baylor. He had 15 against Oklahoma State. He had 10 against Oklahoma. He had 10 against Texas. So he scored in double figures in 4 straight games, which is huge for them. And then, like we talked about a little bit earlier, I think Dajuan Harris, his emergence has been incredible for them over the last 4 or 5 games. I mean, Dajuan Harris is certainly not someone who's going to just be a lethal scorer, but in the last 4 games, 17 against Texas, 16 against Oklahoma, only had 5 against Oklahoma State, but then goes for 14 against Baylor. And a lot of those come in the second half. He makes 4 of 6 from beyond the arc against Baylor. So, like, Dajuan Harris is starting to find it. If you date back to the game against Kentucky, where Kentucky basically just dorked him. They're like, we're going to leave you open and make you beat us. He makes a couple shots in that game. He's averaging he's averaging 11.4 points a game in the last 7, which is obviously about 3-4 points more than what he's averaging the season overall. And Dajuan Harris has started to emerge as one of the Big 12's top 3-4 point guards, I guess you could say. And it's a league that's obviously filled with a lot of talented guards.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't want to talk about Kansas anymore. I don't like talking about Kansas. We can get over Kansas right now. We'll wait and see. I mean, they're in the midst of a great stretch right now. But you can have confidence in them again, and the same like that.
But this is the
confidence in K-State. But I just think like we'll have to see how it continues to stack up. Tonight's a good place to start for that, and then for K-State tomorrow against Baylor. Like we'll find out quite a bit about the Big 12 this week. It's all going to come into to better focus tomorrow night. Texas is going to host Iowa State. That's going to be significant to see if Iowa State can get on track again, and then Texas. If they're really going to pull this off, they're going to have to win a game like this because they have a really tough Final Four games. Probably the toughest Final Four in the Big 12. All 4 teams they will face are ranked opponents. They'll get Iowa State and KU at home, and then back-to-back games in the middle of all this at Baylor and at TCU. So Texas is not out of the woods yet with how everything is going to work out for them. And then also, I was looking at this for conference tournament seeding and who's going to have to play who and how the season will work out. We're going to go a long ways in just determining on if K-State and some of these other teams are safe from having to play that first night of the Big 12 tournament, because the league's so weird and wacky that there's still the possibility that things could happen to where a team like K-State, who's played well, or Iowa State could slide into having to play on Wednesday night. And that's just, that's an unfortunate thing, but it's the reality of the Big 12 this year. Right now, it seems like there's a pretty defined 3 that we know will be there. It's going to be Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. It's just a matter of who that 4th team is going to be that joins them. And a significant one tonight, Oklahoma State at West Virginia. If West Virginia wins that game, there seems to be a greater likelihood that Oklahoma State will be the team that ends up having to play there. So, unfortunately, I won't tell you have to root for KU tonight if you're a K-State fan, but to give TCU a loss. But for sure, you're wanting West Virginia to win this evening to tamp Oklahoma State down a little bit more and put K-State in a position where they just have to worry about playing Thursday and not 4 games in 4 days if you actually want to make it to the conference title game. So that's just a little thing that I was looking at and I think is kind of fascinating to move forward with. Final thing that we'll look at real quick is on Saturday, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee released their top 16 seeds. I figured K-State would be in it. Most people expected they would be. I was a little surprised that they still had them as a 3 seed. I know that, overall body of work, there's probably a lot of respect to be given to K-State still, but I just assumed a team that had lost back-to-back games against the, Tech and Oklahoma bottom of the league teams, they would drop a little bit, but the selection committee had them as a 3 seed. They also had Iowa State as a 3 seed, and then K-State went out and got the win. So what was your takeaway from the initial 16 that were released by the selection committee? Start with your thoughts on K-State, and then you can kind of branch out to anything else that took you by surprise.
I expected Kansas State to still be in the 3 seed mix. I think that there's a very high likelihood that they're going to be no worse than a 4 seed. I think that it's very clear that the NCAA tournament committee is putting a lot of respect towards the Big 12, considering the amount of teams that are in the top 16 from the Big 12. Obviously, Baylor's in the Big 12. Obviously, Texas is in the Big 12. Obviously, Kansas is in the Big 12. K-State, Iowa State are all in the Big 12. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting about it from a whole big perspective was that it seemed to put a lot of emphasis on metrics, which I think is kind of interesting. You look at like Tennessee, they were a 3 seed. I know it came out before they lost to Kentucky, but I'm interested to see where some of these people fall come the actual selection Sunday, because there seems to be an interesting favoring towards like metrics, because Arizona was a 2 seed and they were the 6th highest overall. But Texas is another team that maybe isn't as high in the metrics as Arizona is. If you kind of look at KenPom and different things like that, I mean, Arizona's 9th, and right now in KenPom in Texas is 11th. So there were certain areas where it looked like they really favored metrics and other areas where it looked like they didn't. So just kind of trying to figure out how they're going to seed things come Selection Sunday is always interesting to me. To be honest, I don't expect a whole ton of movement between the top 3 seed lines. Like, I don't know if I expect any of the teams that are in the top 12 to fall out of the top 16 seeds overall in terms of a seed list, just because there's not that much time to really kind of fall out of it. There's only 2 weeks, and you'd really have to kind of struggle over the last couple of weeks and maybe get bounced early in your conference tournament. So I don't expect there to be a whole ton of movement in this area.
Yeah, and the Big 12, those teams in particular have some protection. Like, you know, if K-State were to lose to Baylor tomorrow night, I don't imagine that a loss to Baylor rattles them from their spot as a 3 seed right now. They probably would have to lose their next 5 games. So you go 0-4 to finish the regular season, then you lose your first one in Kansas City, then maybe you fall to a 5. But I think most of the Big 12 is in good standing at this point. They can only really help themselves and move up. You know, you talk about the metrics and everything. I think it's obvious that the metric that the committee was looking at when they kind of took this all into consideration was their own, the net. I mean, K-State was a spot behind Iowa State. Iowa State was better in the net rankings, still is, than K-State. You talked about Arizona versus like Texas. Texas, a couple spots higher in the net ranking than Arizona is. I think that's really what it came down to, was they valued their own tool overall, and that kind of helped push some teams above with the mix of like eye tests and everything else that's gone into it. I think when it's all said and done, I think KU ends up being the number 1 overall seed. I mean, I know that I said I was done and sick of talking about KU.
I would like to point out that you started this at the beginning of the show.
How so?
You talked about how you put a lot of money on them
I
tonight,
didn't say that in the show, Alec. You don't have to divulge
and how
all
it's
my
down
secrets.
to like not bet on Kansas tonight
It's
against
true.
CPU.
I would tell anybody that.
So
It's
you
dumb
started
not to
it.
bet on Kansas tonight.
I
I
think you
said
really
that
do
off
want to talk
air.
about
I
Kansas.
said that off air. And I don't want to talk about them. I just, want them to win me money. But I do think that they'll ascend, because they're inevitable, as Gabe and I try to tell you at the start of the year. And you look around everybody else, like I think Houston could possibly slip up. Now, if they don't, maybe they're able to hold off Kansas. Alabama already, has had their slip ups.
That ain't true. The loss to Tennessee wasn't a bad loss.
It wasn't a bad loss, but I mean, I don't know. It's
They
a
lost to a
loss.
top 3 seed on the
That's
road.
true. That's true. They did do that.
You're not going to get penalized for that loss. That'd be like penalizing Baylor for losing to K-State tomorrow.
Well, I mean, I just think at the end of the day, if you look at it, I think you can start to tell yourself KU's better. And I think KU ends up as the number 1 overall seed if they go on a pretty impressive run here, which I think they likely will.
Again.
I'm just saying, it's more so me fighting for the Big 12 and thinking that, the way that teams are starting to play, that it would be kind of insane to not have the Big 12 represented at the top. I also think that, I think the number that they said on Saturday was that the top 80% of the teams that have been in the top 16 reveal have stayed inside the top 16 come Selection Sunday. So like what you're saying, where you think most of all the teams in the top 12 probably don't slide outside of the top 16. I think that there's a lot of truth to that, and it's likely true. So now it's just going to come down to monitoring how everything else plays out and where everything goes. And hopefully these next 2 weeks go by pretty quick, because I love conference championship week, and then selection Sunday is always a lot of fun. So we'll have to see how it ends up working out. But K-State being at number 12, then they get the win against a team that the committee had at number 11 is significant. So that's a step up, a positive note. So I don't know, just something to keep in mind, and we'll see how things move going forward with everything else. Newest top 25 has been released. K-State slides down to number 14. The loss to Oklahoma costs them. So they're down. They are now a spot behind Miami in the top 25. Iowa State slid to 23. TCU's down to 24. Other Big 12 teams in the top 25. You have, let's see, Baylor stays at 9.
Why is Northwestern not ranked?
Northwestern is ranked. They're number 21. Texas is at 8. Yeah. KU at 3. So KU's moved up to number 3 now. So there's your Big 12 in the top 25. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma State had to do was probably not get smacked this weekend, and they probably were in the top 25. Unfortunately, they got smacked, so they are not in the top 25. But that's a look at things right now. So, good. K-State, I think that probably makes sense. I thought that they would probably slide to 14 or 15 last week after the loss to Tech. But again, I think the committee didn't know how to find ESPN Plus, so they just didn't have to watch them. And then they were able to see that they lost to Oklahoma this week. So K-State had to get dinged a little bit for those 2 bad losses. But if things go well the rest of the way, they'll continue to move up a little bit. So that's about all there is right now. We'll have full recap on Wednesday from the game between K-State and Baylor. Some other things to dive into as more things kind of start to pop up and pick up as we get close to March. Football recruiting will get hot again. A lot of offers have been going out. Guys will start to be on campus in March, and spring football will be getting fired up in the near future for K-State. So it'll be a busy March in Manhattan, and that's always a good thing after the last 3 years have been spent at home on the couch watching other teams play basketball. So that'll do it for Alec and I. Head over to Email Online. Check out all the great content over there, my Monday thoughts, as well as Alec with the pick and preview that'll be up this evening to get everybody ready for the game with number 9 Baylor and see if the Wildcats can get another signature win this season. The 7th win against a top 25 team if they're able to do it tomorrow. They got their 6th over the weekend, which is a program record. So all good notes to have, and that'll do it for us here on Email Online on this Monday.